Welcome back to the show, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He's always busy, but with these storms, his agency is busier than ever. He joins me now to talk about preparations. Mr. Secretary, thanks for making time for the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Man, I mean, we're not even through with Helene, and now we're on to Milton. It's rough.
That's right. You know, yesterday I participated in a briefing for President Biden with cabinet agencies, and I got to say it's the only time I can remember when we had to brief on the response to the last disaster and the preparations for the next one in the same meeting. Communities are being pummeled, and the same responders often who are dealing with one storm are also dealing with another. That being said, there's an incredible amount of partnership, coordination, resources. There are now over 8,000 federal personnel on the ground, more than 300 just from my department alone. That includes folks working in regional operations centers, state emergency operations centers, people embedded with FEMA, and so many others in the affected states. So we will continue doing the work for as long as it takes, and nobody in the impacted areas is alone.
Can you tell me how you're being proactive versus reactive in anticipating the storm? Like, what do you do ahead of the storm?
Yes. It's been really important to do everything we can while we have that period to prepare. That's included supporting evacuation efforts, making sure that the shoulder lanes were clear on I-4 and I-75, for example, when people yesterday and earlier today were evacuating, and making sure that we have teams pre-positioned, including from the FAA, where we have a lot of personnel who are involved in being prepared to get aviation back up and running. We're also closely tracking what's going on the maritime side. Port Tampa Bay, that single port accounts for about 40% of the fuel going into Florida. So it takes a lot of coordination with the Coast Guard, which will make the call on when it's safe to reopen the port, as well as port operators, supply chain actors, and our own teams to help with that. So we're doing everything we can on the front end, but it's really in the aftermath that most of our tools and resources come into play, helping make sure that there's the funding and the technical assistance to do that recovery work for as long as it takes to get those roads and bridges and airports and ports and supply lines back up and running.
And you've got all those airports closed along the west coast of Florida. So I guess depending on how long they stay closed, that it would seem to me would likely disrupt air travel, maybe nationwide.
So yes and no. Certainly, it's a networked system. So what happens to any one part of the system affects the whole system. On the other hand, unlike some things that have disrupted air travel in recent years, this one there has been a lot of time to prepare. Many of the airports that announced closures did so with about a day heads up, making sure that they could allow the flights to depart before closing. And so there has been more of a chance to absorb and prepare the disruption. But still, no question about it. When you talk about this many flights canceled, that's a big deal.
Just a technical question, but do those airports have to get the airplanes? Like, they can't just leave them hanging around, right? I'm trying to imagine what 200-mile-per-hour winds and a 15-foot storm surge would do to an airport.
Yeah, that's right. You know, whether we're talking about airports, ports, or bridges like drawbridges that have had to be locked down, a lot goes into getting them ready for a storm and making sure that that everything is prepared and is safe. In the case of aircraft, moving aircraft out of harm's way as much as possible has been an important part of the storm preparations.
And finally, Mr. Secretary, the role of disinformation in this. How much of this are you having to swat down?
This is a real problem. I have never seen this level of falsehood being pushed during a disaster response. There's always scammers, there's always rumors and confusion after disaster, but I've never seen anything like this. Now, having said that, even though there are some very irresponsible actors harming people by pushing out falsehoods, I do want to say there has been a strong bipartisan response to that makes clear that you should be committed to making sure there's good information, regardless of your politics. And I will tell you, I've been talking to mayors, governors, senators. They have been Republicans and Democrats, and you would never know from listening to our conversations which ones were which ones belonged to the same political party as I did and which ones didn't. I would encourage everybody to turn to trusted sources of information, including local officials, local responders, your mayors, and verified information from entities like the National Weather Service or FEMA to get good information.
Not Twitter. Not Twitter. Good information.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is not the time to be looking to some guy on the internet. to tell you how to keep safe in a life-threatening situation. Look to those sources that, by the way, a lot goes into making sure that they're well informed, whether we're talking about the information that will go out through the National Weather Service or on the transportation side, resources like 511. So every state has a 511 system that is validated information to help you get what you need to know, whether you're trying to get out of a danger area or whether you've evacuated and down the line after a storm, you're looking for a safe route to get back in.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Take care.